What if I told you that somewhere in the remote mountains of northern Scotland, there stands a man who hasn't moved from his post in over 300 years? What if I told you that this man guards a door that leads absolutely nowhere, carved directly into solid granite? And what if I told you that everyone who has tried to move him simply vanishes? This is the story of Sir Aldric McReynolds, the Knight of the Threshold, and the most disturbing mystery that the Scottish Highlands have ever produced. In 1697, the village of Canmore was thriving. Nestled between two towering peaks, it was home to nearly 800 souls who made their living from sheep farming and the occasional traveller seeking passage through the mountain pass. The village had everything it needed: a church, a blacksmith, a mill, and most importantly, peace. That peace was shattered on a fog-laden morning in October, when the villagers discovered something that defied all logic. There, on the northern face of Ben Glús, the massive granite mountain that loomed over their homes, was a door. Not a cave entrance, not a natural formation, but an actual wooden door, complete with iron hinges and a brass handle, set perfectly flush into the solid rock as if it had always been there. But that wasn't the strangest part. Standing before this impossible door was a knight in full medieval armor, his sword drawn and pointed toward the ground, his head bowed as if in prayer or contemplation. The armor was unlike anything the villagers had ever seen, black as midnight, with strange symbols etched into the metal that seemed to shift and writhe when you looked at them directly. The village elder, a man named Hamish McBride, gathered a group of the bravest men and approached the knight. They called out to him, first in English, then in Gaelic, but received no response. When they drew closer, they could see that the knight's visor was down, concealing his face entirely. His breathing was so shallow it was barely perceptible, and he stood with the stillness of a statue. Hamish, being the practical man he was, reached out to touch the knight's shoulder. The moment his fingers made contact with the black armor, Hamish screamed and jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. Where his skin had touched the metal, there were now strange markings, like frost patterns, spreading up his arm. Within seconds, these markings began to glow with a sickly green light. The other villagers tried to help Hamish, but he was backing away from them now, his eyes wide with terror. He kept pointing at the knight and muttering words in a language none of them recognized. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the glowing stopped. Hamish looked down at his arm, and the markings were gone. But when he looked back up at his fellow villagers, they could see that something fundamental had changed. In his eyes, there was a knowledge there now, something dark and terrible that hadn't been there before. Hamish lived for exactly 7 more days. On the 8th day, his wife found him in their bed, his body perfectly preserved but completely lifeless, his face frozen in an expression of absolute horror. The village physician could find no cause of death. There were no wounds, no signs of illness, nothing. It was as if his soul had simply abandoned his body in terror. Word of the night and the mysterious door spread throughout the Highlands. Scholars came from Edinburgh and Glasgow, priests from the Catholic and Protestant churches, even a few brave souls who claimed to study the occult. Everyone who approached the knight experienced the same phenomenon. The moment they touched the armor, they would receive some kind of knowledge, some terrible understanding that would leave them changed forever. And within a fortnight, every single one of them would die in their sleep, their faces bearing that same expression of ultimate terror. The door itself proved equally mysterious. It was made of oak, but when pieces were scraped from its surface for analysis, the wood would crumble to dust within hours. The brass handle was warm to the touch, even in the dead of winter, and occasionally, those brave enough to get close reported hearing faint sounds from the other side. Not voices exactly, but something like breathing, or perhaps weeping. Several attempts were made to open the door. Each time, the knight would raise his head slightly, just enough that observers could catch a glimpse of what lay beneath his visor. Those who saw it described eyes that glowed with the same sickly green light that had marked Hamish's arm. But behind those eyes was something worse than malice or hatred. There was sorrow, an infinite, crushing sadness that seemed to weigh down everyone who witnessed it. When someone tried to turn the door's handle, the knight would grip his sword tighter, and the temperature around the entire area would drop so suddenly that frost would form on the ground, even in midsummer. The door itself would begin to vibrate, and that breathing sound from the other side would grow louder, more desperate. But the door never opened. Something was holding it shut from the other side, and whatever it was, seemed just as desperate to keep the door closed as the knight was to guard it. As the years passed, the village of Canmore began to change. The constant presence of the knight, the unexplained deaths of anyone who touched him, and the growing sense that something terrible waited behind that impossible door took its toll on the community. Families began to leave, seeking new homes, in distant valleys where they wouldn't have to wake up each morning and see that black figure standing sentinel on the mountainside. By 1720, only 200 people remained in Canmore. By 1750, fewer than 50, and by 1780, the village was completely abandoned, leaving only empty stone cottages and overgrown fields as testament to the community that once thrived there. But the knight remained. Through decades of harsh highland winters, through summers when the sun blazed down mercilessly, through storms that would have frozen or drowned any mortal man, he stood his watch. Travelers passing through the mountains began to report sightings of him, always in the exact same position, sword drawn, head slightly bowed. Standing before that impossible door, the truly disturbing part was that he never seemed to age. Detailed drawings made by visitors in 1700 looked identical to photographs taken in 1900. His armor never showed signs of rust or wear. His posture never changed. Even his sword remained perfectly sharp and bright, as if it had been forged yesterday. In 1932, a team of archaeologists from the University of Edinburgh mounted the most comprehensive study of the knight ever attempted. They brought specialized equipment, cameras, and measuring devices. They documented everything: the precise dimensions of the door, the exact position of the knight's feet, even the mysterious symbols on his armor, which they managed to sketch without making direct contact. What they discovered was even more unsettling than anyone had imagined. The door wasn't just set into the rock, it was part of it. The wood and stone had somehow fused at a molecular level, creating something that was neither fully organic nor fully mineral. Carbon dating of samples taken from around the door's edges suggested it had been there for over 2,000 years, but that was impossible. The village records clearly showed it had appeared overnight in 1697. More disturbing still were the photographs. When developed, every single image of the knight showed the same anomaly. Where his face should have been behind the visor, there was nothing but darkness. Not shadow, not black metal, but a complete absence of anything. It was as if the camera couldn't capture whatever lay beneath that helmet. Or perhaps there truly was nothing there to capture. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Margaret Sinclair, made the fateful decision to attempt communication with the knight using a gramophone and loudspeaker. She played recordings of various languages, musical pieces, even sounds of nature, hoping to provoke some response. For hours, there was nothing. Then, just as the sun was setting behind the peaks, she played a recording of a child's lullaby. The knight's head snapped up so quickly that several of the researchers stepped back in alarm. For the first time in over 2 centuries, he was looking directly at them. Dr. Sinclair later wrote in her journal that his gaze felt like ice water flowing through her veins, and that behind the glow of those terrible green eyes, she saw something. That made her understand why so many people had died of fright after touching his armor. She saw a recognition. The knight knew exactly what he was guarding against, and the weight of that knowledge was so terrible that it would have driven any mortal mind to madness. But he wasn't mortal anymore, was he? He was trapped, bound to his post by something far more powerful than duty or honor. He was a prisoner as much as a guardian, doomed to stand watch forever over something that must never, ever be allowed to escape. The lullaby seemed to awaken something in the knight. For the first time since his vigil began, he moved a single step backward, pressing himself more firmly against the door, and raised his sword so that its point was aimed directly at the research team. The message was clear. "Come no closer." Dr. Sinclair ordered her team to pack up immediately. As they gathered their equipment, she noticed that the door's brass handle was turning slowly, as if someone on the other side was trying to open it. The knight pressed harder against the wood, and they could hear him speaking for the first time in centuries. The words were in Latin, barely audible, but Dr. Sinclair recognized them as part of an exorcism rite. The research team fled the mountain that night and never returned. Dr. Sinclair's official report classified the entire incident, and her personal journals weren't discovered until after her death in 1968. In those private writings, she revealed something that hadn't appeared in any official documentation. On their last night at the site, she had dreamed of the knight. In the dream, he had removed his helmet, revealing a face so twisted by centuries of horror and despair that she woke up screaming. But it wasn't his appearance that terrified her. It was what he had told her. In perfect, clear English, he had explained exactly what was behind the door and why it could never be allowed to escape. Dr. Sinclair never revealed what the knight had told her, but she did write this: "Some doors are not meant to be opened. Some things are not meant to be released. And some souls are not meant to find peace. Because their eternal suffering is all that stands between our world and something far worse than death." To this day, the Night of the Threshold continues. His vigil, modern satellite imagery, shows him in the same position he's maintained for over 3 centuries. Hikers occasionally report sightings, always describing the same figure. A knight in black armor standing before an impossible door carved into solid rock. The Scottish government has officially classified the area as dangerous and off-limit to civilians, citing unstable rock formations and extreme weather conditions. But locals know the real reason. They know that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some guardians should never be relieved of their duty. Because whatever waits behind that door, whatever drove an entire village to flee in terror, whatever knowledge turned brave men into corpses twisted by ultimate fear, it's still there, it's still waiting. And the only thing standing between it and our world is a knight who traded his humanity for an eternal watch. A soul who chose damnation over dereliction of duty. The next time you find yourself in the Scottish Highlands, and you catch a glimpse of a dark figure on a distant mountainside, remember the Night of the Threshold. Remember that not all heroes get to rest in peace. Some are doomed to stand guard forever, protecting a world that will never know their names or understand their sacrifice. And pray that you never find yourself curious enough to seek out that carved door. Because some knowledge comes with a price that no living soul should ever have to pay. The knight learned that lesson 3 centuries ago, and he's been paying for it ever since. In the end, the most terrifying mysteries aren't the ones we can't solve. They're the ones we shouldn't solve. The knight who guarded a gate to nowhere isn't just a story about an impossible sentinel standing watch over an unexplained door. It's a reminder that some boundaries exist for very good reasons, and that the greatest acts of heroism often go unrecognized, unsung, and unrewarded. So the next time you see a closed door, remember Sir Aldrich McReynolds. Remember that sometimes, the most important job in the world is making sure that door stays closed.